The Bio Tapestry illustrates the Norman conquest of England. It is essentially 70 meters of political propaganda that justifies the invasion and portrays William the Conqueror as the rightful heir to the English throne. There are 93 Willies found in this depiction, 88 of them on horses, 5 on humans. The second biggest phallus can be found on King Harold's mount, but the biggest one, of course, belongs to the stallion presented to William the Conqueror right before the Battle of Hastings, because he's just that cool, and it's not like you could embroider him dropping his monster condom that he uses for his magnum dong. So the stallion having a bigger badongle than all the other horses had to do the job. This piece is only one example of weaponizing wiener size for political purposes. In this video, we will go over a few others, but to find out why the phallus is so significant to humankind, we need to analyze the long/not that long, like not long enough to be scaring the hoes, history of the Schlinky. Chapter 1. The origins of the wienerverse. The wiener is a persistent and versatile symbol significant in nearly every historical era, but Mesopotamia and Egypt were the world's first great civilizations. They developed writing, agriculture, and also writing about agriculture at around the same time. Life back then really just revolved around grain and the fertility of the land. That's why these ancient societies turned nature into fiction and created gods out of whether their civilizations will starve or thrive. However, what's interesting about some of these early creation myths is that they seem to place the wiener is the one and only giver of life. For example, the Sumerian god Enki threw backshots over Mesopotamia and they turned into the Euphrates River. And in ancient Egypt, it was believed that the primordial supreme creator Atum jizzed out the universe in an act of divine masturbation. And thank goodness socks weren't invented at the time. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the phallus was not merely an organ of reproduction, but held the key to the creation of life itself. Some very solid evidence for this is the Ang sign, a hieroglyph for life, which initially symbolized a penis sheath. But that's just the tip. Of the iceberg. There's also a very clear link between having a boner and divinity in ancient Egyptian art. The god of fertility Min, for example, is almost always depicted as having a boner. But interestingly, while many deities can be seen bricked up in illustrations and carvings, societal norms of the time deemed it inappropriate to depict mortal men in such a way. Ancient Egyptian Dogen being an exception, of course. This is significant because it's the first time we see the wiener as being a symbol of higher status and power. And it wasn't about the size of the sword, keep in mind. It was about the status of the swordsman. Another god often seen with a stiffy is Osiris, god of the afterlife. In the myth of Osiris, Seth cuts up and scatters his body across Egypt, justified by the way, and his wife Isis attempts to gather all the parts in order to resurrect him, but she realizes Osiris's wiener had ended up in the Nile and was swallowed by a fish. Most likely this one. You might think, well, that's an oddly specific thing to happen to a god, but if you take into account what the phallus represented at the time, aka the ancient schlong is life mentality, it makes sense that Osiris's wiener being absent is what sentenced him to the underworld, a place where life is absent. It's also worth mentioning here that while Osiris did get a new magical, possibly golden wiener from his wife... Oh, thanks, babe. Christians and thieves would come to Egypt hundreds of years later and artistically castrate gods like Min and Him by chisel censoring their divine dongs. And in some cases, the powder that was the byproduct of this chiseling was actually consumed as a sort of early placebo boner pill. Like, dude, did you get this from a compounding pharmacy? Nah, man, I got it straight from the compounding god himself. Ha-cha-cha. We'll talk about Christianity and its consequences on the cult of the phallus a little later. Next is Chapter 2, the unrestrained Greco-Roman wiener worship. The golden age of ancient Greece, or the classical period, was defined by a sort of hippiness. The popularity of cynicism and the masculine urge to fight in the mud naked with your homies really gave a lot of power to the wiener and removed any shame around nudity in general. It was a very free the phallus historic period. This was when herms became a cultural staple in Greece. Herms are essentially square blocks with a head carved in great detail at the top, a wiener carved in great detail a bit lower, and nothing. Literally nothing else, just head and schlongers. What a great era it must have been for artists who can't do hands and feet very well. Like, guys, do you like my OC? This is his head and his penis. Please like and share. Homes were placed on crossings, borders, or boundaries as either protection or signposts. Phalluses were already used to ward off evil spirits and protect travelers, so it makes sense for them to be present on these monuments. And yes, the first pillars did have the head of Hermes, who was originally a phallic deity. Both the Greeks and the Romans also displayed various weiner objects in their homes for good luck and safety. And most of these decorations look suspiciously similar to the shit you see at Anthropology. I swear, millennial women will get something from there and go, yeah, it really ties the room together, and it's this. Anyways, it's safe to say the weans remained a symbol of fertility, but here's where it gets interesting. The Greeks thought wieners were like really funny. Playwrights of the time often took advantage of that. Like, how do I totally rip on this current political figure in my play? Dude, what if you like give him a really big, like huge dong? That's the funniest shit I've ever heard. Costumes in Greek plays often included exaggerated breasts and penises for a comedic effect. The Greeks were also the inventors of the low-budget comedy fat suit. This, as you might be aware, is in contrast with the fact that when it came to the higher arts, Greeks favored clearly smaller, placid dongs. To them, it was just classier. It showed restraint and intelligence. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. Just keep in mind for now that to the Greeks and Romans, large dongs were reserved for beasts, fertility gods, and ancient family guy. Also, in terms of wieners, I think the major difference between the Greeks and the Romans is just how gay they were. Not the amount of gay, but how gay. Homosexuality in ancient Greece seemed more romantic and focused on grooming, mentoring bonds. While Romans further developed the Egyptian concept of boner dominance by inventing dick power dynamics. There's more on that in this video, by the way. But regardless of sexuality and who penetrated who, both the Greeks and the Romans had the phallus penetrating all aspects of their culture, from protective penis amulets and monuments honoring the fertility gods to just regular household items and toilet graffiti. But then, Chapter 3, the medieval wiener mysteries. On one hand, the medieval church condemned the ancient fertility cults and ousted the once powerful phallus. But on the other, with Christianity came the cult of what is possibly the most famous dick in the world. I am talking about J-Man's Holy Johnson, or well, a piece of it, and what is believed to be the only piece of him left on earth, the Holy Christ's foreskin. During the Middle Ages, many churches claimed to be in possession of this coveted relic. Body of Christ, body of Christ, foreskin of Christ. The idea is that Jesus, as a Jewish boy, was circumcised, and in the Middle Ages, people developed this idea that his foreskin might still exist on Earth, and they developed a devotion to it, explains James White. Unfortunately, in the early 20th century, the Vatican banned all discussions around the relic and possibly hid not only information about the holy foreskin, but the relic itself. Its last location was believed to be in Kolkata, but in 1983 it mysteriously disappeared. Some blame Satanists, others think it was the Vatican, and I guess the Scooby-Doo gang weren't available at the time, so we'll never know who took Jesus' cap. But I think the bigger question now is not where is it, it's why were the Catholic priests so obsessed with baby Jesus' foreskin, Another wiener mystery from the late Middle Ages is not a relic, but a popular yet questionable motif. Like the Greeks, medieval people also thought penises were really funny. The borders of illuminated manuscripts were decorated with numerous little wiener drawings which existed purely for whimsy's sake. But one illustration stands out, the enigmatic tree bearing not fruit, but wieners. It's interesting that nobody can say for certain whether this was another symbol of fertility or if it was just crude medieval humor. Some even argue that this tree is more closely related to witchcraft, as one of the things that made witches pretty scary during this period was the belief that they could take your dick. There are more copy pastas than verified sources when it comes to this image, and we have to keep in mind, these things happened like 600 years ago. That being said, we probably would have had more information had it not been for Chapter 4, the Great censoring. The relationship between society and the wiener grew more complicated with time, mostly because of Christianity. When the Roman Empire transitioned to Christianity, many wieners were massacred, not only because they were pagan relics, but because they clashed with the Christian doctrines surrounding modesty. We know more about the Greek and Roman phallus worship because of the numerous relevant artifacts found in Pompeii in the late 18th century. But even they were briefly locked away by King Francis I of Naples in the early 19th, because the discovery was a bit too scandalous for the Christian ruling elite. So many paintings were hidden, artifacts and statues destroyed, sculptures castrated or given the ridiculous vine leaf treatment. And because of events like the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church's ban on sexual artwork and explicit texts, the Obscene Publications Act, Christian moral hiding turned the wiener, once a symbol of fertility, safety, luck, or just pure whimsy, into a symbol of lust, sin, and even demonic worship, which drew parallels between the devil serpent and the baloney pony. Christian moral hiding also hid gay penguins from us for nearly 100 years and completely changed humanity's relationship with sex and nudity. This will be relevant in Chapter 5, King Henry VIII's armor with exaggerated codpiece. Talking about penis size preferences in the early modern period is kind of hard. Obviously, there are no records of average length, but there is some literature which positively speaks about larger dicks, specifically wider ones from the late medieval period. There are also many records, some of them official court records, which describe the ideal size of the time. Why? Well, a man failing to produce a child was grounds for divorce, and to prove virility, men will have their penises examined by friends, midwives, and unbiased strangers. To give an example, in the case of Catherine Barley versus William Barton, this inspection took several months, and the widow stated that the archbishop's penis was just like her husband's and she had 7 children. A tailor concluded that it was long and large enough to have carnal knowledge of any woman living. A father even admitted that it was longer and larger than his own, and a woman described it as sufficient to serve and please any honest woman. Barton obviously won the case and probably felt like the late medieval version of Turkey Tom in his My Side video. But see, these inspections were done because people thought infertility issues were linked to penis size. Because what else would it be? It's not like they could count spermatozoa by hand. It generally was believed that a small penis cannot deliver the seed. However, if a penis was too large, it was believed that the generative spirit of the seed would become weakened by the time it reaches the end. So this idea that the bigger it is, the better wasn't exactly the case. And we have further conflicting ideas here. The penis was becoming something for which a man can assert dominance. If you look at the many absurdly exaggerated codpieces, which was the fashion at the time. But a big member in very Greek fashion was still used in political satire. Like this drawing of Crown sympathizer General Lafayette riding a big ostrich-looking member which Marie Antoinette is stroking? It was meant to portray him as a hedonist, but this wasn't supposed to look cool. But it does look cool. But it wasn't. Not during the French Revolution. See, this is because the Greek trend of having a small fella kind of managed to live on as Christian modesty and moderation. Michelangelo sculpted and painted roughly 145 groin ferrets throughout his life. All of them roughly the same size. And yes, the Renaissance did see an increase in the number of nude male figures in art. But as most of you know, the Renaissance was the revival of the Greco-Roman beauty ideals, so the penises were on the small side. Very approachable, very modest. And as the West saw it, very civilized. You can tell where I'm headed with this, right? Chapter 6. The Penis Measuring Crusades of the West. European pseudoscientists have been very fixated on the sexual anatomy of African men since the 15th century. Some of the first travelers in Africa wrote about the enormous ding-dongs that they saw there. But here's the thing, they kind of, sort of, definitely made it up. See, these explorers did not write their logs to say, we saw some really cool dudes, they tried to kill us and wouldn't accept Christianity, but man, their dicks were massive, so it's all good. They wrote about these people's nakedness and their sexuality in a way that was meant to dehumanize them. And so the large wiener became a tool for describing lesser cultures as more sexually animalistic. Later in the 17th century, the British also set sail to Africa in search of gold, but came back with this statement instead. African men have been cursed by God to have oppressingly large penises. As slavery grew significantly in the Americas during the 18th and 19th centuries, pro-slavery advocates increasingly cited the grossly misinterpreted biblical curse of Ham, stating that the African people are his descendants. And today, this exact thing is repeated through the pornographic BBC, the other BBC, myth. Hubert Samuels, a sex educator who specializes in black sexual experiences, describes how this stereotype has managed to persist for so long because of, well, the change in ideals. Right now, masculinity isn't exactly this. It's not masculine Christianity, it's physical dominance. It's hypermasculinity and hypermascularity. I mean, these are bodybuilders from the 1900s and these are bodybuilders today. We often speak about how women's bodies have become hypersexualized, bigger is better commercial products, but as of recent, it's the exact same for men, and both of these ideals have incorporated so many racial stereotypes. And okay, I have to say this now. The penis sizes around the world charts you see on Instagram are not peer-reviewed. There is no materials and methods, no databases referenced. If you actually look at penis sizes by geographical region, you might have something there, but by race, the largest difference is less than half an inch. The size of your penis depends on nutrition, genetics, hormone levels during puberty, and joking. Not race. Which brings me to the other conspiracy on the other end of the spectrum. Chapter 7. The Wiener and the European Goldilocks Zone. There was a little bit of an issue with the whole African men have bigger penises and have more sex declaration. So another race was brought into the literal dick measuring contest. Asian men, who by having smaller penises would surely put the white man in the just right Goldilocks zone for wiener sizes. Conveniently, the British who had colonized India and Hong Kong did claim that the men there were physically weak and feminine. While at around the same time in America, the East Asian immigrants who had come during the 1800s to build railroads and work in mines were now banned from working those jobs because took her South Park clip at a South Park clip.
Oh, they took our jobs! They took your jobs!
This meant that they could only work low-paying and, at the time, zero-aura domestic service jobs like cooking and laundry. Media did its best to portray Asian men as feminine, submissive, weak, and impotent, but in reality, that was most likely to hide that the West was actually scared by the outcome of the Russo-Japanese War. So their idea of slander was, we have bigger dicks, but not too big. They are actually the perfect size. Here's what's also interesting. The first male sex symbol in America was a Japanese man called Kentaro Hayakawa, more well known by his stage name Sesue Hayakawa. He was very popular during the 1910s and 20s. But after World War II, anti-Japanese propaganda and pseudoscientific race theories completely erased that. Again, the only good source I could find only confirmed one thing. Chinese men in particular are growers, not showers. But again, when comparing to other races, the difference really is insignificant. To end this final chapter, I'll quote Alex Tison. When writing on the subject of race, size, and insecurity, he says, its color was its size. I also enjoyed it's not about measuring inches, it's about measuring value. And to end the video, I really think we're past Christian moral hiding. Pornographic stereotypes that are like 100 years old can easily be dismissed by conducting studies where participants don't self-report measurements and researchers take lifestyle, diet, and hormones into account when drawing conclusions. Because we can't have dudes injecting lemon bottle at the base of their shafts. From what I've read, this persistent Facebook myth is really impacting men's mental health and physical health also, which is so sad to see. Something that started out as a divine symbol has been boiled down to misinformation on the internet and a ruler. Can we just go back to wearing protective penis amulets and whipping your dick out in court? You know, people used to do hands on dick swear too. What happened to that? And to what extent are we blaming Freud for like all of this? Write down your opinions in the comments. Bye Gamersubs, subscribe, and okay, bye.